Okay, so originally this was supposed to come out on Tuesday, September 5th, and supposed to Friday, August 31st, because I have a new podcast with Haydn Shaw, which is my third. And by the way, I'm not going to just completely go crazy and have a million podcasts. I might be announcing a fourth soon, which I know that sounds a little tiny bit nuts, but I promise you I'm not going to go over 5 for now anyway, okay? We'll see how the next couple weeks shake out. I just can't say anything else right now, other than I'm really, really excited about the direction of where things are going. Haydn Shaw is one of the most brilliant business minds that I've ever met, and probably has had more wisdom fall out of his jeans pocket than I will ever accumulate in life. The podcast that you can check out that we do together is called The Consultant and the Millennial, and unfortunately iTunes has the name screwed up and it's all squished together, so if you want to find it right now, you can either search Seth Tower Hurd or Haydn Shaw, which is in the show notes to this episode, the spelling on that. Hopefully that's fixed by next week. I was planning on putting this out on Tuesday, but because of time, I don't have the ability to do a solo show, and I'm really trying to stick to this Tuesday and Friday schedule, so we're putting it out today. Haydn is one of the foremost experts on generations in the workplace in the United States, and has worked with a lot of really big corporations like Hilton Hotels, NASA, Department of Defense. And so this guy really, really gets how the whole generation thing plays into American life. And of course, we're taking the angle of politics because this is my political show, not my business show. So the big thing we're going to cover here is, are the millennials going to stay on this track of being the most liberal generation of all, or are they going to veer off in another direction as my generation gets a little older? Okay, so let's just get into it. Haydn is absolutely brilliant. If you have any kind of career, I really encourage you to check out our other podcast as soon as it gets fixed and you can find it, or search one of our names, like I said. My name's Seth Tower Hurd. Let me introduce you to a very, very, very good friend of mine. Let's be neighbors again.
And if we can't walk in love, we're a noisy little gong, a bitter little song that a bully sings out of key. And if we can't walk in peace, we'll forget about the least of these. A mother crying on her knees for a boy who's locked away. There's a voice calling me.
Okay, so we're switching from business, which you can hear over at The Consultant and the Millennial, new podcast from Haydn and myself, and getting into the political side of things. Haydn's been featured in, Forbes, Time, HuffPo, all the big ones, and has done work with lots and lots of really, really big corporations, and has consulted some of the top nonprofits in the country as well. And is one of the experts on like what's up with the whole generational thing, because that's the main thing that he helps companies with these days. So I'm I've been called a gray hair millennial, an originalist millennial. This is a big enough generation gap, right? Like I'm 34. To think about the fact that the 18-year-old going into college right now, who, man, would they were alive for 9/11, right? If you're going into college right now, you're alive for 9/11. And is that where kind of the cutoff is? Or we're wrapping up what the millennial generation is? Where is that at?
You bet. People divide it in different spots. I divide them in born in 81.
Okay, so 1981, I get the internet in junior high, obviously. That's back when you had to pay by the megabit or whatever. I probably had some overages, exactly. But I learned a whole bunch of things that gave me a career later in life. I've thought about that. Right. Like if I was in the 1970s, what would I be doing for a living? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, everything I do is connected to communication online, right? So I don't know what I would be. I'd probably be a very frustrated copywriter for a catalog that sold office supplies or something like that. And the tail end here is what is it? High school freshmen are the last millennials, or the first of the next generation? Where's the tail end of that?
Well, most folks are saying, most of us are taking our best guess, because you can't tell for sure until you see voting records, purchasing records, and enough survey data, right? But yeah. Most of us are saying our best guess is somewhere around juniors in high school.
Juniors in high school?
Right now. Juniors, seniors are the end of the millennials, or the beginning of Z. Because there's always this cusp where there's overlap between the two generations. So I'm a cusper for the Xers and the Boomers, and you would be toward that cusp end of millennials and Xers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're still pure millennial, but you're right there at the edge of where they kind of have that overlapping cusp.
You know, what I think actually the biggest mile marker is when my last job, I had a boss who was 2 years older than me. He was in 7th grade when Nirvana came out, and I was in 5th grade. And somehow that makes all the difference. Because I was like too young.
I think that, it just, that smell, all I would say, Seth, is that smells like sociological research right there. That's what it smells like.
Okay, so this last election, at least the perception was that with Obama twice, it was the youth vote, this kind of coalition of the youth vote, the women vote, the minority vote, I don't know who else they would lump in there, that kind of all came together around a common candidate and got this guy elected. With Trump, it felt very, very much like the baby boomers having one last hurrah, right? I'm not a Bernie Sanders supporter. I'm not a political liberal. But I see my generation going in this direction, which is something that you say probably won't hold 100% like it is, because as millennials get jobs and have to pay taxes, they maybe decide that the government shouldn't take all their money, right? So is this generation really leaning left, or is this just what 25-year-olds do, and there's a lot of 25-year-old millennials?
Well, that's great. There is a classic saying that conservatives have always comforted themselves with. This saying is frequently attributed to Winston Churchill. It goes like this: if a man's not a liberal in his 20s, he has no heart, and if he's not a conservative in his 40s, he has no mind. So that's the saying that people comfort themselves with. And when in both elections, when the Republicans lost, especially the first one, when they lost to Obama, and while they may lose the state house, they may lose local elections, Republicans have pretty much handled the presidency. Since World War II. So when they lost, they comforted themselves with, the millennials will grow out of this. 3 facts. The first one is the millennials elected Obama. Other groups are part of the coalition, no doubt, but they elected Obama and they did not elect Hillary. They elected Obama over Hillary. So Hillary is never connected well with the millennials. Secondly, we don't get more conservative as we get older. So that old classic saying is not accurate at all. We don't get more conservative. We get more fiscally cautious, but we don't get more conservative.
Okay. So not being more conservative, are we talking fiscally cautious would be, I don't want taxes to go up. I don't want government spending to go up. What would you categorize as not more conservative? Where would that land?
So, this whole package of how involved should the government be, how big should government be, there are indications that as people get a full-time job and money's taken out of their paycheck, that they're less willing. There's a 20% drop in the polling question. Everyone should have access to health care.
Okay.
People who are not having that taken out of their check believe that that's like 70%, high 60s. You get it once you're fully employed and it's coming out of your check, it drops down below 50%. And so Bernie Sanders' platform is a lot more attractive to people before it comes fully out of their paycheck.
Yeah. And
so I think there is a life stage dimension to the millennial support of Bernie Sanders' version of the Democratic Party.
Okay. On the healthcare thing, I was never on it because what I feared happened. I started out pre-Obamacare era. I had a $300 deductible on Blue Cross Blue Shield. So that meant if I, wanted to go see a counselor because I was going through something, I did it. Preventative medicine type stuff, I did it. And then I went to a $1,500 deductible individual, even though I'm married. We both have been doing our own plans because of cost. And so preventative medicine goes out the door. And now everybody's saying, well, no, it didn't go far enough. What happened is we just didn't get universal enough. And I'm saying, okay, a lot of veterans died, not over war, but over universal health care, because they were in veterans hospitals and homes where the VA let them die. And so, why would I be against your healthcare stuff? Well, because I think I might die. Because as it is, I think that we're going to go there one way or another. We're going to wind up with some kind of universal health care. And my plan is just to make enough money to go pay cash in Mexico where it's cheaper to have surgery if I ever need it, because I don't think I'm going to get it in a country with universalized health care where Canada is currently running 20 weeks behind on specialists. And everybody's like, the whole Republican idea of death camps is crazy. Okay, well, death camps are crazy. But the fact that this case in Britain was it Charlie Gard or this little boy that the English decided not to let the parents leave the country to seek treatment in the United States they're going to pay for themselves because it's universal health care. So all of a sudden the government has that call to make that they're not letting these people take their kid out of the country. Am I an anomaly there? Or like with my concerns?
You are a bit of an anomaly there. Over 75% of millennials say that people should have access to healthcare just like they have access to water or air. It is a part of the common good. It's part of the shared commonwealth. Most people aren't as worried about it as you are because they have less access to it if they have less access to it than you did at one time. So they don't have anything to compare it to. You remember what it was, and now you remember what it is now. And so, yes, you would be a bit of an anomaly statistically. Do I think it'll go to universal health care? Yes. As soon as the new plan was passed, I knew that hybrid plan was going to be frustrating and expensive for everyone. It would provide coverage for 25 million more people, but it would do it in a way that stretched the system, and everyone saw. Most people in the industry saw this hybrid system as kind of the worst of both worlds. It got more people covered, but it wasn't going to work. And so you either go back, or you go to a single payer system so that you could begin to re-legislate the same thing. And do I worry about single payer systems? Yes. Do I worry about it in the vet because of VAs? No, I've actually worked with VAs from time to time, and they've got the challenge there is they work with a specialized population. They get kind of the leftovers of things, and it is a universal payer system within a much larger system. So I don't think that's a fair comparison.
You don't think so?
I think there are some warnings, but I don't think it's a fair comparison.
All I know is, and in some ways maybe I'm just whining because statistically, my family tends to live well north of 90, and cancer and that type of thing doesn't tend to be a big concern. However, the survivability of cancer in the United States is way better than anywhere else in the world. We are still way number one on that. And if you got to wait 20 weeks to see a specialist, that's where I'm concerned about, will it kill you? Actually, yeah, it might. Like, if you can't get into a specialist and you have cancer, yeah, it absolutely might. Flip side, I know somebody that had brain cancer in Canada, paid nothing, came out, was fine. That worked. The question is, if I get sick in 15 years and we have this, which one am I going to get? And we can't answer that right now.
No, that's right. That's right. There's some real questions about it. And, Mayo Clinic is a great model.
Okay. Just tell me about that.
Well, Mayo Clinic's model is you're working in a team. Physicians aren't paid by the piece. Many people herald Mayo Clinic's model as kind of the model for the future of what it means to structure care in a way that people get great care, and it isn't as economically driven as the current model is. Even though medical institutions struggle to make ends meet and stay afloat. I mean, many medical institutions are really struggling. Even the for-profit hospitals are really struggling, and that's after they got out of the fields of medicine like mental health that weren't paying, that weren't reimbursable, that weren't reimbursed a lot. They're still struggling financially. Mayo's model is much more about a holistic partnership. The doctors get paid differently. And that kind of, that's a hard model to reproduce because, just like the VA is its own institutional illustration, Mayo is its own institution with its own culture within the larger, in contrast to the larger culture. It's one thing to be a special little outlier with its own special culture and its own uniquenesses and its own cool factor. It's another thing to try to spread that everywhere. So while it's a great model, and it could work, I really do wonder about the ability to get everybody. I think there's going to be somewhere between the Mayo Clinic and the VA that we're going to settle in at. And so, yes, I agree with you. In 15 years, I may not be able to get a specialist. Yeah. And I may have to fly someplace else. The tourism to India, I think, will go way up.
Because they have good medical care.
Yeah, you can get, if you got money, you can get medical care. People are already flying to India because it's cheaper to get a procedure done. And, how many of the physicians that I go see are from India? And so they're like, wait, it took a while for people to get used to the fact that I'm not going to get less medical care in many cases because it's the same surgeon I'm working with here.
And that's the same thing. Like in Arizona, there's a big kind of, I don't know if you would say, medical tourism industry. Fly to Arizona, drive across the border, pray to whatever God you believe in, that the kidnappers avoid you, and get pretty fantastic health care. So, I mean, let's move on to another subject. Fortunately, I grew up on a farm where people were super gluing their own cuts shut long before that was called a liquid bandage in the emergency room. So I will figure it out. I'm not even kidding on that. I saw probably 15 to 20 should have been stitches, cuts, patched up at my grandmother's table with super glue. Squeeze it together, put super glue in it, wrap it up, and the skin grows back and pushes the glue out. So I know how to do stuff like that. I will figure it out.
But it is a different world, and I can understand why millennials are saying what you're saying. I got $1,500. I don't know if I can afford preventative medicine this week. Wow, this is kind of, I don't know what I do. And so that's quite a contrast to my wife who grew up with big steel, and they went to the doctor with no out-of-pocket for anything until she was almost in college because of the healthcare plan of big steel. So it's such a contrast of the world they're growing up in that you can at least understand the questions that they're asking and the fact that it doesn't seem to make sense.
Let's talk about individual liberty, societal issues, right? The big one is, gay marriage. I come at this from a place of a constitutionalist that I just don't want the government, and, keep in mind, I'm not a libertarian. I don't want the government involved in relationships at all. I actually didn't, I got very upset with the county clerk when Amanda and I were getting married, and I looked at her, because I actually yelled at the guy. It was a yelling match in his office over some paperwork. And this is the county, we got married in the, county of 14,000 I grew up in. And I just said, she wouldn't go for this. I was like, let's just not get married let's get married in the ceremony in a church, as a religious commitment, but I don't want the government involved in this. I don't want to deal with this guy. And she said no, of course. Where the whole marriage thing came from at first.
And which makes me feel so much better about you having a family. Is that Amanda said no to your, when you begin a sentence with, no, I'm not a libertarian, but I did get into a yelling match with the clerk over my wedding papers. I'm just really feeling good. I really feel good about, I like Amanda personally, but I really feel good about Amanda as, being the other half of parenting for you, the family you'll have one day.
Okay, here's the thing, and the reason I'm not a libertarian is I don't think it's workable. A lot of the things that the Libertarian Party puts out there. That being said, I want to be left alone as much as possible. So there's things I think the government probably needs to be doing, but it was a stupid situation. But that marriage laws really came about trying to ban interracial marriage, and then so when the gay marriage thing came around, I was like, there's no winning here. This is going to happen. It was in Massachusetts and California legalized when I was in college. I was like, okay, it's over. let's talk about something else. It's over, right? There still is kind of a contingency of the old guard Republican Party that thinks it's going to be reversed. I'm not sure to what end or to what purpose. And I just looked at it as, well, these laws came about because of interracial marriage. I don't care. They're never going to change. On social issues, though, obviously millennials are way liberal in that regard, right? Where are the other social issues going to come down at, do you think, with this generation? Because there's a lot of millennials that are saying free speech should not be absolute. Obviously, if you see me and I'm out and I'm not at the pool swimming and wearing a Speedo, I probably am carrying a gun. So, the Second Amendment, millennials don't seem to care as a whole. I don't think that much one way or the other one about that one, but they seem to be less into the Bill of Rights than I would like my generation to be. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
They are governed by a dominant theme, and that is the individual rights and freedoms of an individual.
Okay, what's that mean?
Well, so around who you kiss, around who gets to tell you what you can, what you can do with your body. So around issues around sexuality and individual control, abortion, etc. Those things. They're liberal. Around race and gender and ethnicity, they would be more liberal than previous generations were in terms of being more open and more accepting. I love what one millennial said about, they said, the world was in my grade school. I grew up in a very lily white community, rural community, but my kids grew up in a world where they dated people of different ethnicities when they were in junior high. And so it's a very different world for them. And so it's about individual liberty. It's not about the person. It's not about their skin, classism, weight, and being proud of your body. It's all about individuals. Now, you can take that to say some of the extremes in college campuses. University of California, Davis, I read a couple of weeks ago in the Atlantic Monthly. So, not a hyper-conservative publication. They were talking about why the Democratic Party lost the election. And one of the things they said is, Hillary Clinton could have said at the University of California, Davis, melting pot is not a microaggression. Take it off your list of microaggressions. That's silly. It's what we've always done. So we are not harassing another culture by using its backbeat in the newest pop song, and it's not a microaggression to fuse their noodles with your hot sauce. It's just called America. And so, they said Hillary Clinton could have turned this stuff back if she would have, taken that on. And both I agree with the point they made in the article about some mistakes she made, and the idea it's a microaggression to talk about a melting pot. That's all stuff, in my opinion. I agree with you. That's gone too far. But it's an extension of the idea of everyone has their own individuality. That should be protected. That should be respected. Nobody can say anything bad about anybody else. Everybody who says something bad's a hater. And if a person is going to be hateful, then their speech ought to be limited because that makes somebody feel bad and that limits their rights.
That terrifies me. That's the one thing. Like the lack of free speech, the lack of a free press, that is the one thing. And I don't want to be Glenn Beck here where everybody's a Nazi, right? And everything is the end of the world, kind of the cable news thing. No free press, I think that America can fall. That is the one thing. I think America can fall apart, no free press, because you have Venezuela, you have Russia, where all of a sudden, even if it's a democratically elected leader, and I'm not talking about right now, I'm talking about like 15 plus years out, right? You have a democratically elected leader that if there's no free press, they can just, think about how easy it's going to be to drone somebody. Right now, Obama did it, and I'm sure Trump has done it. They picked out individual targets and be like, pop that guy. And some dude playing a video game in Nevada puts a missile right on the top of a dude's head. Without a free press, it's so easy to kill somebody that, it's not that hard to imagine a situation where a leader gets democratically elected, and then there's some kind of quote-unquote crisis, and they say, well, I can't leave right now. And if there's no free press to police that, then they stay. Is that way conspiracy theory or not?
No, I think it's definitely possible. Heavens, there was a report a couple of weeks ago about, where they were asking experts to take to make predictions on how likely we are to have a civil war in the United States. And some of them, they averaged out to the 30s, 30%. In the next 20 years, would there be a civil war in the United States? And it averaged out to be in the 30s, 30% chance of a civil war. I think that's high, but yeah, I think there's some things worth worrying about, and it really does come down to what I said, I called in one of my books, hyper-individualism. I think what you're referring to is the fruit of a hyper-individualistic stance, and that a person's feelings have to be protected. Well, I agree that a person's feelings have to be protected, but I'm 35 pounds overweight after getting old and writing a couple of books, and my health rates shouldn't be the same as somebody else because I am carrying more weight than I did before. And so the point of it is, should we make people feel bad about body image? No, that didn't help anybody. Is it healthy to be very heavily weighted? No. And if you feel bad about that scientific fact, but then write stuff about the haters of global warming, I don't know what to do with the inherent contradiction in your need to feel good and at the same time feel bad about everybody who is wacky conservative. And so,
well, I feel like in the past, meaning has come from, and part of this probably is the fact that I grew up in a mixed blood family with a lot of Asians around, and a bunch of half Asians and cousins and stuff like that. Much more of an Eastern mindset of, you relate to your own humanity a lot more through the lens of community, and also the Appalachian side of things. But it used to be that you were able to. Oh, what's that?
I've never thought of you as a hillbilly Asian, and so I'm a whole new insight's coming together, Seth, after knowing you for a couple of years.
Well, growing up, I feel like people drew meaning or felt like their life meant something out of who they were to other people, out of who they were to their family, and certainly part of that was accomplishing things you set out to do, right? But now it seems like where you draw your identity or your worth as a person is how much you like yourself. And I feel like that's really dangerous because we just really wind up with a lot of selfish people. And this whole American experiment thing is predicated on the fact that people on the whole don't suck. And we seem to be, kind of marching away from that a little bit as far as like your feelings being protected. So I wrote about this actually with the whole kind of Taylor Swift, Katy Perry feud, relevantmagazine.com. Actually, it's last week because this.
Yeah, I read it. I thought you did a great job with that one.
Thank you. So here's, as a journalist, people say terrible things about me all the time. They are not journalism shaming. They are whiny little trolls on YouTube that just go on and on and on and on, and it happens every week. And there is not a week that goes by because of the kind of work I do that somebody doesn't say something really bad about me on either Twitter or YouTube. You know what? That is the cost of doing what I do. And if somebody threatens my personhood or my family, then, that's a problem. Other than that, this is the cost of my job. What I do in the world, this is what I'm going to have to pay. So every job has a cost, right? Like, so you have to travel a lot, right? Doctors sometimes have to work 24-hour shifts. I have to find, really lame people who will find me on the internet. I'm not kidding you. I wrote this article about Christian hip hop 8 years ago. People still bother me on Twitter about it. And I don't even bother blocking them. I just move on because
whatever.
Because it doesn't matter. But this idea that your feelings can be protected and free speech can happen at the same time is not true. It's not true.
Well, sir, here's what I think about that. I think that this is a life stage. I think three things. It is a continuation of a philosophy, a combination of psychology, and a combination of postmodern philosophy And hey, don't quit listening. I won't even talk about that anymore. For those of you who thought philosophy class was a lot like having your face smashed in a vise. Okay, it's a combination of psychology, postmodern philosophy, and parents that really did put up posters that said there's no one more you-ier than you, Dr. Seuss. And so you put that all on hyperdrive, and what you get is, I shouldn't have to read Catcher in the Rye because it makes me feel bad. Well, Aristotle said that the whole reason we have tragedy is for catharsis, to let out emotion. It's going to make us feel bad. It's the bloodletting of our emotional state. And so, yeah, I think that's taking it too far. And I think when people get out in the world of employment, they're going to have somebody say about them, well, there is no one more you-ier than you, which is why we're not promoting you and we're promoting them, because no one is more like what we want than they are, and no one is more you-ier than you. So you can either be you or you can get a promotion. And anybody in a marriage has had somebody say to them, you need to stop being you and you need to do what they want you to at work so that we can pay our bills. Thank you. How about you be, and everybody said in their marriage, I love you, but I'd like you to be a little less you and a little less irritating. And so part of it's just the life stage of running into situations where you are asked to change and you're asked to feel bad as a matter of course.
No,
So I think could it get really bad? Yes. I've seen most things course correct over time.
But
and one generation has successes and the next one comes along and already the indications of Generation Z, if you want to call them that, the next generation is that they're kind of the anti-millennials.
Okay. And so you think that, like, you know, somebody that has to feel super special. And I was an old millennial teaching young millennials, if you will, college. And I had students be like, well, are you going to say anything nice about my project? And I would always say, here's what I have nice to say. I believe you. I really think you have talent. Go redo this. It's not good. My job is not to make you happy or to make you like me. My job is to make you employed upon graduation. You will not be employed upon graduation with this kind of work. Go do your work. And then they would complain about me, and the administration brought me in and said, this is what the students are saying. And I would say, they're saying that because that's what I said to them. They're only saying that because I said those words verbatim. That's only where it came from.
And then what did the school say next?
Yeah, the school actually did back me. They asked me to be a little more diplomatic.
Which is why you collect podcasts like other people collect game consoles. Because, people listen to you because diplomatic is not your strongest suit. So that's beautiful. That's what makes you fun to talk to.
Well, okay. So getting into the microaggression thing, because I've had guests on to talk about this. I don't know that I've really gotten my head around, like, this came apart. I mean, this didn't exist in 2015, or it didn't exist much. Microaggressions and trigger words 2 years ago at least wasn't on the national consciousness. I think
it wasn't a national conversation. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So microaggressions are, you say things that somehow I interpret to tell me, can you just define those two things? Microaggressions.
Microaggression, it grows out of a good thing. So it grows out of a good thing. It grows out of the idea that we all have unconscious biases. That diversity in the business world has gone from, let's make lists of all the differences, to say we all have biases. We can't help it. It's how our brain functions. What we can do is be aware of it. Well, out of that idea that we all have biases comes the idea that, oh, wait, I can do things that express my privilege if I'm a white guy and express your lack of privilege and not even realize it. Okay, so tell me, unpack that for me. Well, I just read a post that someone did, and she said, I'm in line to mail my box of stuff off to college, and the guy in front of me is going to Princeton, and the people at the post office said congratulations. And then the mom in front of me mails off her kid's stuff to a college. I am mailing my stuff off, and they said, okay, where are you mailing this to? I said, mailing it to college. Where are you going to college? She said, Harvard. And they said, the one in Massachusetts? Yes, I'm a black girl going to the one in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
She said, because she was responding to a guy she went to school with who said, I'm not prejudiced. I just don't get this idea of white privilege. And she said, if you've never had somebody wonder if it was a Massachusetts because you're black, then you've got white privilege. You didn't ask for it. I'm not condemning you for it. I'm not saying it's your fault. But if you weren't the only family where people threw rocks in your swimming pool, then you got white privilege. If you have to prove yourself in your neighborhood so people quit throwing rocks in your pool, then you got white privilege because you never had to do that. You were already accepted from the beginning. And so those are small ideas of biases and aggressions that people make. Microaggressions are these very subtle things that come out of unconscious bias. I didn't make eye contact with you. Well, Oxford University had researchers that discovered that if a person breaks eye contact with a person of another race, it's prejudice. It comes from prejudice. But the university said, we are not considering breaking eye contact a microaggression because there's absolutely no way for us to run a school where people can't break eye contact with somebody else. We're not all going to live in awkward body language because we're doing microaggression. So Oxford said, we're recognizing our researchers, our professors of having done a valid study, and we're not accepting it because we can't function as a school this way.
Man, that's interesting because too much eye contact actually is what I would call it's like male foreplay for aggression. And this is something I had to get my head around growing up in a very strong Appalachian, Scots, Irish, German culture of people that all came from the mountains of Pennsylvania, the mountains of Kentucky, was that like in Appalachian culture, everybody's very polite because you live with the descendants for generations, right? So the Hatfield and McCoy thing, which cost 40 or 60 lives or something like that over a family feud, you don't want that to start. So you're very, very polite, right? The only way that you really insult somebody is if it's basically foreplay for fist fighting. Dignity culture, which is much more of a British Puritan hand-me-down thing, that's much more about trying to corral someone into proper behavior by embarrassing them into behaving well so that society will function better. And when I moved up to Chicago and somebody would insult me, I was always a little confused in my younger years. Hopefully I'm more balanced and tempered now. I was always a little confused. I'm like, oh, okay, I get how this works. So we're going to fight. It doesn't seem like a good idea because I'm 6'6" and this is not a good matchup, but okay. Back to the eye contact thing, where I grew up, holding eye contact with someone for too long was the unspoken, it's like, two boxers signing a contract.
Bring it on.
Okay, we're going to do this. So that's very fascinating that now you have to do that. I would say that, well, how do I know I'm going to fight somebody? Not that I'm in my 30s. I'm a little more grown up now than that. Talk to me about safe spaces and what are the other, trigger warnings. Because I've had people on before and nobody's articulated this to a way I could even get my head around it to fully agree or disagree with it because I didn't get it. Maybe they were a little too...
Okay, well, once again, because, working in generations, I work in the diversity space. It comes from a good place. Trigger words come from people can have different emotional traumas. And, there's a big debate. Dr. Jean Twenge did just this latest Atlantic Monthly has an article on how our phones are ruining our next generation. And, she's the worrywart of the millennials, that they've basically been ruined by society and by their parents. And, they have far more depression, far more suicide. The research is that the millennials don't have as much grit as previous generations, to use a buzzword the last 6 months in business. Grit's a big buzzword. Resilience. Yes. And all of that, statistically speaking, that's true. Millennials have more depression, less grit, and they have more psychological problems. Question is that just because we report it more, or is that a true increase? So one of the things that's happened over the last 10 years that's great is we're more open to talking about mental illness. It was just in the USA Today yesterday. Sports figures talk about their mental illness. So we're more open with all of that. We see it as a disease rather than a moral failure. That grows into, I experienced some trauma earlier in my life. We're much more aware that people are sexually abused, for example. Even though millennials have half the abuse that the boomers did, we're much more aware of it now.
Jiminy,
So,
I had no idea of that.
Because we just have far more ways of abuse, kidnapping, and sexual abuse is even down over what it was. When you don't allow your children to go outside, it is harder for them to get kidnapped and hurt.
Yeah.
And we just have far more ways of notifying people. All the phones in the entire town go off if there's worry that a child's been taken or harmed. And so it just harder to, it's possible, but harder to do things to children. And as the whole Catholic Church scandal has illustrated, there's nothing sacred from making people aware of abuses that are done. So anyway, the trigger words are about, I've experienced past pain or trauma, and this triggers pain and trauma, and therefore I need to be away from situations that might involve me in those trigger words. It comes from a good place. Suddenly we got boxers talking smack before a fight saying, oh, well, that was a trigger word because that reminds me of time I got knocked out. You could take that to an extreme and sadly ruin everything in life with trigger words. I would love to have some trigger words in my marriage. Get up off the couch and help me. I would love for get up off the couch to be a trigger word.
I totally get that. Is this something that's going to, do you think it's going to course correct and be something that's a little more reasonable and helpful? Or is it, because it seems like, I mean, colleges are prone to extremes because you've got kids that are getting out there and searching for their identity for the first time. Who am I without mom and dad? Who am I with all the options on the table? And they tend to go to places that by the time they're 26, 27, 28, they're like, oh yeah, that was a little much. That was a little much. So is it, because it's such a big thing on colleges right now, are we going to see this more in corporate America and daily life? Like, are there going to be PTA meetings where it's like, well, you trigger warning to me? Well, we were talking about what kind of cookies to bake.
No doubt about it. Well, just like we have people with peanut allergies, and if we had them with peanut allergies, they just died by 3 years old in the past.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they would have just said I had weak constitution or something, and I would have died, and they would have been like, well, he just was born not right, which some people probably still say that. But.
Well, I'm not saying that's not true, but I don't think it's because of your peanut allergy. So today, parents are much more sensitive to, this is a peanut-free table. All the people who can't be around peanuts will eat at this table. Or we just don't have it at all in the cafeteria. So people are used to having things that trigger more today. So will it make it into business? Yes. What'll make it into business is a much greater sensitivity. We already have seen it. I love The Economist magazine from about 3 years ago. They did an article on how businesses are already nicer. At National Cash Register back in the 1880s, the owner of a National Cash Register was mad at one of his employees, and it was a wooden desk. So to express his frustration, he lit his desk on fire.
Oh my gosh.
So what all the economists pointed out is we live in a much more people-centered, employee-centered world, and it becomes more employee-centered. And so I'm going to work with a call center today. I won't name the company, but I'm going to work with a call center today who doesn't quite know what to do to toughen up millennials, because having people yell at you all day long is leading to a lot of rapid turnover. And some of the older generations are like, for crying out loud, these people are sissies. Let's go. Hello, it's a job. Just listen, connect, relate emotionally, and be nice to these people. And so I'm going to say to them, you're going to have to give different kinds of feedback than you received. Yes, you're going to have to approach them differently. And you still have to live on the phones in a call center with people saying they hate your product.
Yeah.
They're not calling you to say, I just want you to know, I've never In this case, it's a credit card company. I've never had a credit card that I love as much as yours. They don't take time to call about that, and so get over it. And yes, a lot of this will work its way out. But Seth, the idea that a person shouldn't feel bad, and that if I feel bad, somebody else is doing this to me in its extreme form, I think we're going to live with that psychological leftover for a while. Just like the first half, the millennials had a way too big of a dose on self-esteem. Everything was self-esteem. I can't discipline my kid in the restaurant because I'll hurt their self-esteem. Heavens, I wanted to take parents out in restaurants when I traveled and take them out and spank them. If they didn't believe in corporal punishment for their children, that was okay. But I need to take you out and spank you because your kid's ruining my meal because you can't control your kid because you are just trying to reason with this child that's flipping meatballs around this restaurant because you don't want him to feel bad. They need to feel badly.
Okay. Can we and you've got to shower and get to your gig. So let's maybe shift gears here into the where the state of the American dream is at with millennials. I certainly have a lot of friends who are very hard workers because my generation's been saddled with so much student debt. We're kind of behind financially.
You have no choice but to work hard.
Yeah. So, everybody, most people I know and care about have some kind of side hustle. Some of them could choose it better than others because they light up your social media with, multi-level marketing crap. Which, by the way, for the record, I always ask them, okay, so this is all about selling, right? So if you're good at selling, why don't you go find a way to sell your own stuff or build a business so that you keep the money? There would have to be a lot of money for me to want to give away money to somebody else. It's like, okay, well, if it's, I'm selling school buses and there's a great commission as my side gig or whatever, cool, because I can't afford the school buses or whatever, right? Like I can't get into that. But for most people that are spending so much time, and sorry, this is a little bit of a side rant on like selling essential oils or something like that. They're like, well, I believe
you can do a side rant about a side hustle, Seth. It's just only seems fair.
But I always wonder, like, go flip crap on eBay. Go to yard sales, buy stuff, look it up on eBay when you get there, at the yard sale, buy it, realize you can increase it by $10 and turn over 20 items a week and, spend your evenings mailing stuff out while you got a TV show on.
That's exactly what a guy I know did when he lost his job in the arts.
Yeah. So I get that. Like, there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of things. On the flip side, I'm trying to figure out where the American dream is at in that, a lot of full-time work is going to be going away. A lot more of us are going to have to be freelancers because that's just the way the economy is going. And there's this entitlement of like, I deserve healthcare. I deserve to feel special. I deserve to have nobody bother me. Where is the American dream in that? Because I still see it alive and well in immigrants. There's still people that will climb over each other to get in this country and, vastly increase their station in life and wealth. As I saw the Laotian refugees in Pike County, Illinois do. Like my cousin's grandpa came over here with a PhD from France. He couldn't speak English, so he couldn't work in education anymore, and they wouldn't accept it. And so he went to be superintendent of schools, European educated superintendent of schools to a guy at Kmart. And from there, not only did he build a good life for himself, but all his kids have been super successful, like all of them. I don't see that narrative so much in my generation. I see, give me health care. The corporations are screwing me. Pay off my student loans. Sally Mae screwed me. And there is a case to be made for that. But there are people that have started so much further down than you and are doing so much better. The bottom line is you just don't want to bleed for it. And the thing is like, you don't even have the mentality that anybody should have to bleed for it. And that scares me because we are a fragile experiment that is built on civic responsibility and you going out there and getting it. And when you get it, having the intelligence, the acumen to give back and help other people. And that's what I think is beautiful about the American experiment. If we start from, I deserve this, I'm special, give me my thing. I don't know how it works. Like, talk to me about that.
65% of millennials said that they would consider a socialist president. Now, the older generations freaked out on that. They thought they meant Karl Marx socialist. What they meant was Denmark. And to quote Hillary Clinton, she just kind of brushed that aside. She should have taken it a little more seriously and spent some more time on it. But all she said was, "We're not Denmark. It's not a little tiny country, and it's not going to work quite that way. We are. All you got to do is read a little bit of history, and we are a collection of states that have only recently, comparatively, come together, and seen itself as a collective nation, and there's quite a bit of differences in how people think in different parts of this country, and so it's not going to be the same it would never be the same socialism that worked in Denmark. Even my son's like, Bernie Sanders is the most ethical, honest person. He's not in some pocket of some corporation, Dad. Although as a business major, none of his math makes sense. And so I couldn't vote for him because his math doesn't add up. And I think, Seth, that's what you're really saying is, but the math doesn't add up. We got a really narrow tax base. You go look up the numbers. It is amazing how quickly the percentage of people paying the taxes in the state of California have declined. So the percentage is so much smaller. Now, partly that's the growth of the 1%, and that's a concern. Gentrification, Gilded Age is a concern. The United States has figured it out the last 3 times we've had Gilded Ages. Maybe I'm too optimistic. I really do believe we figured it out before, we'll figure it out again. We got to figure out what to do with the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few people. It's not that's not going to work even from a business mindset. You got to sell something to somebody and they got to have money other than student loans to buy it. So we got to have something other than healthcare costs and educational costs for people. So I get all that. At the same time, we got a really narrow tax base. And even The Economist, which is British, is saying the United States has got a worrisome decrease in its tax base. And so you get a small tax base, and people are saying, I'm not getting my share. And the people paying it are saying, you're not paying into it. And so that, my friend, is what I think will change over time as people move into a new life stage. But I also know that we've shifted left politically, and a new generation may come along that is more conservative. Boomers were much more liberal. Xers are more conservative. Millennials are much more liberal. And the sizes of the boomers and the millennials just mean that there's been a lurch left. All generations are much more liberal on social issues than they were even 25 years ago. But do I think some of those excesses will correct for themselves? I do. But I also think that we got to do that. Something will have to happen with the concentration of wealth in this new economic shift, in this new economy.
Yeah, and totally. Those are super, super valid. I guess what I see on the individual level is if I can actually take this back to social media. I do a fair bit of raising money for various charities on social media. The studies have proven that there is we'll close this out because I know you got to get out of here, but the studies have proven that there's an inverse relationship between how much you post about something and actually giving money or volunteering. So the quote unquote, most activist people, when I try to get them to give a couple bucks or say, hey, come volunteer, because I do a decent bit of volunteering, they don't show up. And I kind of see the same thing with oh my gosh, Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world. How does that take money out of my pocket? Because it actually does benefit me because I'm paying a lower cost for goods and services. And it's oh, well, they're eating up all the retail jobs. Well, that's true, but Amazon actually pays better than minimum wage. 60-some% of Walmart employees, the way Walmart's able to keep their prices low is that I'm paying for social benefits for Walmart employees because they don't make enough money. So it's taking the tax base off of me. Totally get what you're saying about the tax base narrowing. What I find to be concerning, what I hope people understand is that no matter where somebody else is at, you still have the ability to go make your life something better than what it is right now. And Jeff Bezos is not, or the Forbes 100 list is not stealing from you. There's societal problems, but you need to go make your own life as opposed to wait for somebody to make it for you. And
Seth, I think that just to wrap up, I think what captures that best is the research on the 1%.
Okay.
In the past, like the Great Depression, the 1% was the same group of people. You had the same names. The 1% today changes considerably every decade.
Okay.
And what's one of the biggest shifts in the one? So that means that it's not a stable 1% where this handful of people owns all the money and there's no opportunity. And that's a shift. That's a very positive thing. And secondly, the 1%ers are often couples. It's a 1% family because the two of them together. So that's a substantial growth in the 1%. It's not inherited wealth or even somebody owns the means of production, Karl Marx, but it's a dual income professional family. What's fascinating is that 1%ers tend to have children who are 1%ers.
Okay. Oh, because they're getting...
That's what's different. People who are 1% oriented tend to marry and then produce kids who they teach in a way that makes them 1%ers.
Dang. So the point is, and 1% is over $400,000. Is that right? That's the top 1%?
Yeah, you bet. And so the idea is that, the idea that somehow these 1%ers are taking something from me. That really is, in many ways, an old idea left over from old Gilded Ages in the 1800s and then the Great Depression.
Okay. That's a great note to stop on. You and I do this. By the way, if you want to get to that 1% level, which is that's not an unattainable goal to get to $400,000 a year.
Great segue, man.
Then you can be as socialist as you want. You can pay as many extra taxes as you want to. Once you get to that $400,000, you send extra money to the IRS as many days a year as you want to, Bernie Sanders fan. I just want to help you get to that level. And actually, we do both want to promote corporate responsibility and charity and giving back in all seriousness. But Haydn and I do a business podcast, The Consultant and The Millennial. Hopefully iTunes has it freaking fixed. I will put a link in the show notes to this podcast in case it's not. They messed up the title, so you can't find it right now. And as brilliant as Haydn is here, he's also that brilliant at helping you run companies, manage people, grow your own career, and as we say, not kill your coworkers along the way. Okay, and because I'm putting this out earlier than I thought I was, and it's difficult to search for, I'm just going to go ahead and run the entire pilot again right now. And I did this once before with a podcast last week, but in case you didn't miss it, now that you've gotten to know the other part of The Consultant and the Millennial, I just thought you might want to hear it. So I'm going to throw it on here. Hopefully episode 2 will be out like a week from next Friday, and we'll be rolling on this thing as soon as iTunes fixes our dang problem. So here we go. My third podcast. You can hear it now.
This is the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing and/or working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. Now let's join the consultant, Haydn Shaw, and the millennial who fixes Haydn's iPhone, Seth Tower Hurd.
Hey, welcome to episode 0. It's a little rough. I'm making sure I've got the title we landed on. Did we wind up on The Consultant and the Millennial? Is that where we landed?
Yeah, I thought that was great.
Okay, there we are. Welcome to The Consultant and the Millennial, the podcast between an old school mentor and a digital mentee on managing, working with people, navigating a career, growing profits, and not killing your coworkers along the way. My name's Seth Tower Hurd, serial entrepreneur, former major market broadcaster, and a guy that got a text message in August of 2015 that just said, hey, call me about social networking. I got a book coming out. And I don't even know if you put your name on it.
I probably didn't put my name on it because, only people who understand what to do on their phone would know to put your name on a text message. So, shut up.
And then it kicked off one of the most beneficial and important relationships in my life and career that started with me driving an hour and a half to teach Haydn how to put Skype on his laptop and his Microsoft Surface.
That's right. So I could do an interview.
So you could, because I set up all these podcast interviews for you, and you're like, wait, where does this thing go? And so that's how we came together. And we would start having these conversations, and I would be going, man, like I really wish my friends could hear this. Like they could really, really benefit from just like the wisdom that Haydn throws away and doesn't even realize he has. People would be dying for when they're facing problems in their careers. So if I can just set you up a little bit here, my friend, you have helped Microsoft, the Atlanta Falcons, Bayer, the medical company, BP, Edward Jones, Hyatt Hotels, on the nonprofit and international side, World Vision, the international nonprofit, and companies like Banco Nacional in Costa Rica work through essentially their people and management problems. And you got into this whole thing because you had some guy just totally throw you under the bus, and you're like 23 years old, right? Didn't he just say, well, you basically just can't trust these young kids to get anything done? Was that more or less the sentiment that drove you towards consulting?
That was what got me interested in both the generational topic, because he thought generational stuff was completely an excuse for lazy young people to rationalize away why they wouldn't work like he did. And I realized that, hey, management was a lot bigger part of nonprofit world than what I was told when I was in my master's. And so I started reading management books like crazy just to survive. So between those two things, those two jobs, I started becoming a fan.
And so you went into this, you've been in front of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people talking through management, and specifically generational stuff as of late has been like a really big thing. Is I was referred to the other day as a gray-haired millennial because I'm 34, and so like because you said there's like old, middle, and young millennials, right?
There are 20 years, it gives you a lot of room. And so what you grew up with isn't quite the same thing as what my 20-year-old daughter is growing up with, the things that shaped her. And I'm not just talking about technology. One episode we'll talk about that. Everybody thinks, oh, it's technology that changes it. No, the most important research is on generations. It's not technology at all that shapes a generation. It's technology that accelerates generational characteristics and value shifts that are already there. Technology is not what determines a generation, because every generation has had different technology than the one before it. So that's one of the big myths of generations. That's another topic, another day.
Okay. By the way, this is episode 0, so we're just totally shooting from the hip. We'll be back in a week with episode number 1 with one of the top young CEOs in the country on building a company culture that attracts and retains people. And somebody that interviewed me didn't hire me. I wrote a very nasty letter about the interview process, so we wound up being friends. So that's.
And by the way, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for your career development.
Telling off a company that doesn't hire you. Yeah,
right. Yeah, but so that's not an official recommendation, but it worked for Seth.
My mom would tell me always growing up, like, don't burn a bridge, don't burn a bridge. I found that I'm both better at burning things and somehow reconstructing them out of the ashes.
Yeah, that's great.
Than the average Joe. So we're going to get into 6 pieces of information here that can help you as we just shoot from the hip from episode number 1 here. So it's the 6. What was the list again?
Oh, it's the 6 problems your organization, company has to solve if it's going to be solvent in the next 10 years.
Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into it. And I don't actually know all these, so go for it. What's the first piece we're working with here?
Okay, so we're talking about kind of what's the cutting edge in generations, what we're focused on with this list. So there's certain generation problems organizations are going to have to solve going forward. So I'd say the last 10 years that I've been primarily focused on generational differences in the leadership and management work and coaching that I do. And, the books that I've written, Huffington Post articles, all that stuff. It's been as much about the millennials are here, let's interpret them, let's break through the stereotypes, let's use real research and data, instead of you heard somebody who met somebody who heard about a millennial who did this. And now you've got 80% of the millennials saying, we're not like those other 20% who also drive us crazy. Simon Sinek does a video that goes viral where he basically explains the millennials by saying their parents messed them up. Companies, you're just going to have to learn to live with them. See, millennials, it's not your fault. And the millennials just were like, what are you doing, dude? That's not helping. And so there was a lot of backlash to that video, and a lot of older generations went, "That's so true." Anyway, we've done this whole awareness thing for 10 years, and most people are aware that the millennials are here. Some of them are starting to get a little gray and, settling down into the next stage of life. And so what are the questions that people are asking? What are the things that people are going to have to do? And generational stuff is no longer optional, because the millennials are now reshaping organizations just like the Xers did.
Which, by the way, episode 2, it's literally like about as millennial company as you could possibly have. Like, like the movie stereotypes, only in a good way. Happy Medium out of Des Moines, Iowa is what who we're going to have next, and they are just, they millennial so hard the wheels are going to fall off, and they're killing it. They're they're growing like crazy because of it.
Well, and more. Today, we would say, all of the generational characteristics that made boomers and traditionalists mad when the Xers first came into the job market. Fortune magazine's got one of them on the cover in '93, making basically going, "They're bizarre." Everything that the Xers came along and demanded has slowly moved into the way we do things. So today, none of that stuff even surprises us, because we adjusted. And 20 years from now, we'll be saying the next thing about the next generation, and the millennials would have reshaped the world. Point of it is, since millennials are the major part of your future workforce, your managers say the wrong thing to them. You got to solve that problem. Your managers say the wrong thing far more often than they realize. And you don't even know what ticks your millennials off and why they go work for companies like Happy Medium, allergies, and help them grow rapidly. Your millennials don't want to stay. Many of them are staying. More of them don't want to stay. You can't hire good ones. Now, some of the organizations may be doing okay hiring good ones. They do have to work someplace. Their parents finally say, "Here's what you're going to have to do." But in terms of hiring the really good ones, they talk on blogs about what they want, and it's often not the blogs and Glassdoor, and it's often not what large organizations are offering. And I just got an email from a guy in a blue collar kind of company, manufacturer company. He said, "We can't even hire him. We go to job fairs and they won't even talk to us." So your book didn't help me, because you actually have to have some before Sticking Points helps. So what do we do? And so it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, transferring knowledge. The boomers are leaving, and most organizations are transferring knowledge like they did 25 years ago. And we're talking about completely different species. Your organization makes decisions in a way that favors hierarchy instead of group participation. And you think you may have changed because you ask people's opinions before you tell them what you're going to do. But most organizations haven't made significant shifts in their decision-making process, and that's a huge barrier to moving forward. And ironically, you don't fire fast enough. You've got some new employees, and the only way they're going to be worth something is to be fired more quickly than you're firing. You're too nice because your managers don't know what to do, and HR is a little worried they're going to get in trouble.
And you had to walk me through that with my own company, where it was, I'd picked up somebody who'd been through a season of unemployment for a project manager position on a freelance gig to see how it was going. And I don't think she wanted to stay with me at all. And I was like, man, she's terrible. But and I have a hard time turning her out on the street. It's like, well, maybe she'll get a little better. Maybe she'll get a little better. And you just kept saying, fix your hiring decision faster. There's nothing you're going to do to pull this thing out. Like, she just doesn't have the skill set. She's rude to your other employees, and you can endure that for a little while. But the number one reason people leave their leave any job, because they don't like their boss. Probably the number two reason is because they get sick of cleaning up after idiots. I mean, that's anecdotal data, but I mean, we all see
what? That'd be my observation. I've coached about 30,000 managers through the years, and I think that's accurate. I'll give you one more. People lie. It catches up with them. If you're a person that isn't doing anything, isn't producing anything, it takes between 6 months and 18 months, depending on the nature of the job, for people to catch you. And I've run into some people who had employees like that person who really wasn't doing anything. And because they worked remotely and virtually, on projects, it was hard to tell until you found out from the clients that things weren't getting managed. And so suddenly, you don't know right off the bat. And so sometimes people have to quit because they are running from their lack of results. And it's kind of, they switch to another job before they really get busted.
You know what? I'm pointing four fingers back at myself here, okay? Because I did the same thing with my own company. I met with potential client and walked them through some of the website issues of why they weren't converting, right? And the business owner told me, I think my IT guy's ripping me off. Okay, well, fire him right now. Like, I will wait. Go fire him, and maybe we'll go get a good lunch so you can feel a little bit like he's downstairs. Go do it. And it's so easy when it's not you to pull the trigger on that. It's like, well, I mean, if I don't know what he's doing, that's right. And so it's easier. It can't be replaced. And it's like, no, just do it.
No, it's easier with IT because now that in that guy's area of technical specialization, he would have known exactly how to fire because he would have known the conversation to have. But to those of us old school, non-digital native people, IT seems something close to a shaman magic or having a dragon of your own in Game of Thrones. And so people with dragons, what do I know whether or not you're doing a good job? You have your own freaking dragon.
So bottom line, if you want to keep your good employees, particularly millennials, you got to cycle through the ones that are not doing the job. You got to get them out of there. And I found that firing somebody is sort of like ending a romantic relationship. It's just the first one's going to be hard, and after you've done 3 or 4, you got to be okay. I mean, you're going to be terrified the first few times you do it. If you haven't been in that position where it's like, HR has always done it for you or something like that. If it's you for the first time, you just gotta, practice your little speech, bring them in, and let them know and get them out of there so they can process.
That's right. The absolute best thing you can do for a lot of folks is to help them go work someplace else so that they say, oh, this is not good, because they get by with it and they know it's not good, but because nobody's calling them on it, they think, well, I guess it's okay. And one of these days we can talk about this. Your floor sets the performance of the entire organization more than your ceiling. So the single fastest way you can increase performance in an organization is to fire underperformers. Because it raises everybody between 5 to 20% in productivity because they now have a new floor. The lowest performing person in every organization is the performance floor. And if you have some people that ought to be fired, my IT guy is ripping me off, everybody else uses that IT person as their baseline for how low they can go before they're truly a jerk. And you need to raise the floor, and you'll raise everyone's performance.
So somebody who would be average thinks, I can sneak an hour of Netflix in an hour every afternoon because this IT guy just keeps saying he's quote unquote updating the website. He's literally doing nothing. He's reselling stuff on eBay. And I know he's doing it, and the boss doesn't know he's doing it. So, well, I guess I ought to match the level of performance.
You know what? And Seth, people with integrity, people who have, some work ethic and some character to them, they won't do that. They won't do an hour of Netflix. They might, but here's how they rationalize it with integrity. Here's what they say. I don't do that every day like the IT person does. I only do it when I'm tired, or I only do it when
I need to reset because I'm
That's
not
right.
being creative.
People in marketing were being jerks to me. It was a nasty meeting, and I just need some me time. And I don't do what they do. And so you suddenly set a very low barrier, and they use that person. So basically, you only get the performance you want on the days when they haven't fought at home, they've had a good night's sleep, they're feeling great, and the line at Starbucks was not too long.
And there was no red lights.
There were no red lights. So you get the performance you think you're paying for 2 days a week, and because that bottom performer sets a standard so much lower that everyone has a rationalization, even the people of higher integrity, can rationalize their lower energy or their lower performance as, well, at least I'm not them. And so you literally raise all boats by raising the tide of what the minimum standard is. And I helped one organization identify the 10 lowest performers. And it sounds so horrible, but we just started one at a time. Start with the lowest and work your way up. And they literally doubled. They got to went from $500,000 to $1 billion in sales in 5 years.
Holy
and
cow.
Half of that was that they dealt with their lower performers.
So you can think of this as like fantasy baseball in reverse.
Yes.
Let's play a game where we get the managers together and draft our 10 biggest idiots.
Well, you know what? That's exactly what it is, and you can see it in teams. You get a top flight player, and then people begin to believe that they get some hope. Now, I know. Nobody in Miami is going to like it after I say this, but when Cleveland was a beautiful team for people like me who were Bulls fans, because you were guaranteed 2 wins. Every time you played them, you'd get a win. And, they're like, hey, I'm a professional player. I'm a professional ball player, even though I know I wouldn't start on other teams. You draft LeBron and people get hope, and then suddenly you start raising the minimum standards, and people start seeing that, hey, this is not acceptable anymore. And it takes a couple of seasons, and you turn the team around. And so you got to have hope. What happens is managers after a while don't believe there's anything else we can do. They lose hope. If you don't have hope, you're done. So LeBron gave hope to Cleveland and to the team. And once there's hope, then you can raise the lower standards. If managers can't look it in the eye and go, we can do this, then they don't have any reason to give people, they don't believe it enough to push. When managers lose hope, they don't push hard enough, and they let the standards set themselves.
So let me recap the story you just told, right?
Yep.
Company you were working with. The fact that they wouldn't get rid of 10 people who didn't need to be there.
Well, they actually, in a plan of 500, they had about 25, but keep going.
Okay, so 25. It was costing them $250,000.
It was costing them $250 million.
$250 million.
Now, there were some other things that had to happen. One of them was they got one of the best presidents in terms of just raw management talent and intuition I've ever worked with. I mean, he just knew what to do with the ball. He was kind of the equivalent of LeBron James. And I know everybody doesn't get one of those, but because he came in and gave people hope, he pulled that executive leadership team up to a new standard. And then the best performers in the company began to go, yeah, we're going to do something instead of decline year after year. And the lower performers then became nasty, mean, because they were fighting for their lives. It was Game of Thrones down on the shop floor. And then as we slowly gave courage, they needed an outsider to be able to reinforce what the president was doing and to say, all right, who's your absolute most destructive person? And after 20 years of having the inmates run the asylum, they began to backbone up and deal with it. It's a long story about why they ended up in that place. They wanted to be able to fire those, but in order to keep it from being union, to keep it non-union, they thought they had to roll over and play dead. And so happens. And they just began to deal with the worst one, the most egregious one, because the secret to firing is making sure that the other employees see it as fair. If you fire somebody and the other employees don't believe it's fair, the other employees will lower their performance. The other employees have to buy into a firing. That's the tricky part to firing. And so take the most obvious one and deal with it, and people are then relieved, and they began to get the hang of it. I remember about 6 months in, they said, okay, can we make a new list? Because this is great.
Okay. Unless we come
I had to calm them down a little bit. It's like, okay, good. Now that you have a taste for blood.
Well, let me speak to both sides of the issue. I've been fired. I've been laid off. And I've had to end people's employment for performance issues, right? Especially in 2017, the economy's good. It's not that huge of a deal. It really isn't. Like getting, you're going to learn something about yourself. You're maybe going to get a different skill set. You are not ending anybody's life. You're making the best decision for everybody. You're the people who stay are going to be happier. The person who's not any good at it, you can't hold their hand for the rest of their lives. So you might as well rip the Band-Aid off. Unless you're willing to have them move into your basement and feed them and, make sure they pay their cell phone bill on time and make them a functional adult child. You can't hold their hand for the rest of their lives. So go ahead and just do it. Let's run through the rest of these simply because it's Saturday and I'm going to the beach. So go for it.
Yeah, well, I don't live by a beach, and so you suck. Your managers say the wrong things.
So what does this look like for?
What's that mean? It means that many managers said this way to me. I don't know what to do with younger millennials. I finally figured out millennials your age, but I don't know what to do with younger millennials. And because they say the wrong thing, thinking they're communicating well, they're thinking, I'm pretty good with younger people. I got nephews. I'm pretty good with you. These are the things they say when you interview their folks. They're like, oh yeah, you know what? They're trying really hard, but it's the equivalent of not knowing you need to put your name on a new text message.
Okay.
To your point earlier. And so there's just a lot of little things like that if you don't fit, whoever fixes them first wins. And now it's you're going to decline if you can't keep and hire and motivate the right folks. And as a result, people don't want to stay. There's some things that organizations have to do to cut their generational turnover in half. And they can do them. You can't control everything that cuts turnover, but you can cut generational turnover fairly quickly. And as a result, we can't hire the good ones. Some of that in manufacturing is ironic because manufacturing is what these manufacturing jobs are going. Most manufacturing companies are the ones that are struggling the most to find people who are reliable, who show up and do a good job.
If I can jump in right there, this is a different issue. And, probably we're not going to have nearly as many people in manufacturing as the other industries listening to the podcast. However, just had lunch with a good friend this week, who's in cold storage warehousing. And he said to me, my employee base is Eastern European immigrants and Latin American immigrants. And if policy changes like it's changing, he's like, I just don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how we're going to staff this thing. That's kind of like what everybody's going through right now because white collar workers are tough to get a hold of, just like blue collar workers are in a good economy.
Seth, so Japan had this happen, and that's what led to lean manufacturing. Toyota started lean manufacturing because their Xers did not want to work in manufacturing. They saw it as a step down. There wasn't any, as I say to clients, there's nothing to brag about when you're having a beer with your friends after work. And so,
I put a mirror on really well today. It's like,
yeah. Well, that's right. But so I'm talking to National Foundry Society, and they're like, hey, we can't get people who can reprints and weld. Well, the average person the average business major gets out of college making $44 to $48 a year, depending on where you live. The average person who can weld and read a print starts at $75,000 and can get a job anywhere. And so they're like, we can't. And Mike Rowe's been making a big deal about this, but online. But the point is, we can't find somebody to do it because they don't want to tell their friends, well, I'm a welder. And they said, we've been trying to make it look at all the money, look how wonderful it is. I'm like, no. You need to do just the opposite. You need to show sparks flying in your videos. They said, yeah, we do that because that is pretty cool. You got to show a lot of fire, and then you basically say to them, you are the alchemists of the new world. And not everybody can handle it. The Marines get a sword because the Marines are harder. Not everybody can handle this. We pay a lot of money and you'll always have a job because most people can't hack it. They said, it's funny. That's what Germany's doing with these kind of positions. They're basically saying most people are too big of babies to handle this. But if you got the chops, we got the money, and it's an amazing career. Point is, there are ways to go after folks. But most people don't know why the people they're talking to won't talk to them at a trade show or at a job fair. They don't know why, so they're guessing. Anyway, I know we got to get moving. Knowledge transfer. Boomers are leaving this time for real. There's been 2 times when people are like, oh, we're losing our boomers. We got to do knowledge transfer. And then a recession comes along and the boomers quit retiring. But the boomers are finally old enough now that the oldest boomers are getting close to 70. They're like, dude, I'm done. I don't care if I don't have as much money in the bank as I thought I would have after these recessions. I'm done. And so the boomers are really retiring this time for real, and the knowledge is going out the door with them. And when the recessions hit, organizations are like, we're not spending the money on all this knowledge transfer. Problem is, we're still doing knowledge transfer like we did 25 years ago, with older employees pulling up a younger employee and putting their arm around their shoulder and passing on stories. And as a result, 3/4 of the organizations admit that they're in real trouble with knowledge transfer. They're going to lose business and they're going to lose know-how, and it's going to go to some younger firms where people figure out how to scoop it up.
And so what did you know, and I look at myself at 34, and this is what so much I've done with you is text you. What the heck do I do with this person? What the heck do I do with this situation? It seems like younger employees actually do really want it. And like, yeah, how do we fix that? Right? Like, how do you fix this in your company? You know, because I've heard it said both ways. I've heard some companies like, well, nobody's invincible here. We'll go on without anybody. And it's like, well, that's true, but it might take you 3 or 4 or 5 years to get somebody ready for this. Then I've also heard it like, oh my gosh, well, if this person ever wasn't here, you know, like we don't know what we would do. I mean, people do.
Well, the reality is, you know, so the good news is most things that are contradictory are all partially true. Will your organization survive if you lose someone? Most organizations will. Some organizations are so vulnerable to specialized skills or a network of relationships that they go under if certain people left. On the other hand, there are large companies, I mean, multi-billion-dollar companies that lose some key people who had some unique sets of skills. And it is really like losing LeBron James. It is that kind of unique set of skills, and things drop. And I've seen organizations that lose about $200 million a year when they switch leaders because they get somebody that just doesn't have the leadership skills. And over a 3-year period of time, their sales drop. And so there's a lot of truth in it both ways. And the point of it is, it takes 7 years for what's called tacit knowledge, the knowledge that gets picked up outside of what you can pass along in a manual, just the knowledge, the inside knowledge of situations, the inside knowledge of your own organization, the inside knowledge of the customers you're working with. And that's what you can't pass on, and that's what takes 7 years to build, is what's called tacit knowledge, or the inside track, the historical patterns, the knowing what to do. That's the part that's hard to transfer, and that's the part that organizations aren't transferring well. And if you can't keep your millennials, you're not going to transfer it well.
And, you know, if you, this is probably an example that's going to be different from a lot of people's professions, right? But I've done a lot of work in PR. Part of the reason I've been able to be successful in that is because I just have this gut knowledge I haven't even written down on like how I do things. Like, you know, I've been able to place, you know, stories in, you know, that have made it to CNN and Sports Illustrated. And I know that that's a different message than what I need to say to ABC in Chicago to get a morning show TV interview. Right. And if you ask me how I know how to do that, like subconsciously, I figured out what each one of them are looking for, and I know who to talk to. Right. And it's not like I can do it every time. And, you know, I'm running my own company, so it's like I can do it. Right. But as I look at, like, I can't do everything forever all the time and grow the company. Right. How do I transfer that knowledge into like somebody else who could start to learn that?
Sir, you have put it exactly. That is you've expressed precisely what organizations are struggling with. How do I take what my best performers have in their gut and translate it into something that other people can learn?
Yeah, because I really can't tell you, like, if you asked me to write a manual right now, you said, you know, I'm gonna flip you $5,000 by Monday. Tell me, okay, fine, maybe that my knowledge is worth more than that. For $50,000 by Monday, have a 5-page outline for me for how you had been successful in PR. I don't know if I can just write it down right now.
No, you couldn't, because most of the people who are really good, just know what to go back to sports, know what to do when they have the ball in their hand, but they can't explain it as well. Michael Jordan was not a good teacher. When he was trying to help coach out there with the Wizards, he had actually got on the floor and started playing because he didn't know how to explain what he did. So then he tried to show him, and then he just went, all right, let me just play. Because the people who know what to do can't break it down and explain it. You literally have to find somebody else to break it down. Those people can have other people pull it from them, but they can't do it. It's one of the reasons why sports teams pay for sports psychologists, because when they get stuck, they can't break it down and figure out what to do to get unstuck. It makes those people especially valuable because they know how to pull it out of highly effective, highly successful people's heads and help them unravel what's getting in the way now. And so bottom line of it is, if somebody said to you, let's say you're working in a company, because nobody's going to, you're not going to give yourself a $5,000 bonus to write your own manual. But let's say somebody said to you, all right, I'll give you $5,000 bonus to put everything you know down on paper. You would have to take $3,000 of that and go hire somebody to ask you the right questions and help you write it up in a way that would translate it for somebody else, because you couldn't even explain it well, because mere mortals would stare back and go, so go back over it again. What would you say to CNN versus a local radio station? And you would go, seriously, I've already explained this 3 times. I know, but how would you know the difference here? And then you would get a little line between your eyebrows, and then you'd have homicidal fantasies, and you would want to kill your coworkers.
And one of the points of this podcast is you to not want to kill your coworkers. Right,
and that's the goal we're trying to avoid. And so when companies ask people who just know to do knowledge transfer, they're actually inviting them to have homicidal fantasies, because when they do write it down, mere mortals don't understand it. And then they get really frustrated because they're like, how stupid are you? And then like Michael Jordan, they're out playing rather than coaching because they just get so frustrated when the rest of us can't pick it up quickly enough.
Okay, so let's solve this problem. And then this podcast is going to be a great example of work-life balance, because we're going to have to finish up the last 3 after the interview of episode 2. Because I live in Wisconsin, and summer is like 6 hours long here. I mean, fall actually happens at 7 p.m. tonight. So get into like, you took us to the place of despair. I'm like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? Like, am I just dead? How do you do knowledge transfer?
So it really is pretty easy. And I kind of gave the answer in that illustration. You find your best performing folks and you stop asking them to write it down, because they can't. And what they write down is inactionable by most other people.
Okay. And you also can't have them just randomly talk to people, or they're going to get frustrated. So where's the solution?
You bet. So you have people who help extract that information from them and then translate it for average people. Now, some organizations do that well, and other organizations do not. And then you have the best folks give stories that other people can learn from. The best folks need to tell stories of how I landed this deal, and then somebody else pulls the principles from those stories and they get turned into tacit knowledge. Because tacit knowledge is, how did you know to do that instead of that? That, my friend, is the secret sauce of passing on knowledge. And it usually, in the olden days, it happened by putting one person with another person, experienced salesperson, junior salesperson, and they'd work that same large account for 2 years until the junior salesperson knew all of those. How did you know to do that?
Okay. So it's actually not as terrifying as...
It's not as terrifying at all. It is updating the fact that most companies aren't going to pay to have, for 2 years, to have the same 2 different salespeople on one account. They're just not, they don't have the cost models to do that anymore. And so as a result, the old systems are broken, and we need to translate what works into new organizational structure with thinner ranks of employees, and to speed up the process. Plus, younger generations are FAQ folks. They really do want to see more in writing and more in video. They really do glaze over when the old guy starts telling grasshopper stories. Okay, Kung Fu, let me tell you a grasshopper. And then they're like, shut up, old man, get to the point. At least that's the look you give me.
You know, I don't think that's true. You know, and if I can just add this maybe small note, as somebody who's worked in a lot of different kinds of organizations, especially if you have a larger organization, you need to be thinking about doing a podcast and a video series as an intranet. Like seriously.
Yes, like seriously.
Seriously. Get your CEO, get your top people, get your smartest people that, you know, every organization's got somebody that they can walk into the room and every employee knows I'm going to leave feeling like I can do this, feeling better about my job. My gosh, package that. Give it to them on email every week. It costs you nothing. You know, one of the ways I was able to grow my the podcast I do on my own to 20,000 listens in the first 10 weeks is I actually do like cell phone videos while driving, which you check your local laws. But I just put cell phone on the dash of my car. I hit record. I drive down the interstate. I talk about something for 10 minutes. I upload it when I get to Wi-Fi. It costs leaders so little to do a 10-minute off-the-cuff video where they just pass down wisdom, pass down tactics, pass down knowledge, and you can deliver that for free. It is so dang easy.
Well, Seth, I just, to talk the other side of that, you just said off the cuff. And that's what freaks out companies. Because when the CEO, well, what freaks out what freaks out the entire administration is when Donald Trump tweets and they don't know what he's tweeted until they see it when everybody else does. And so it's the off the cuff stuff that freaks out large companies because many CEOs have caused real waves of challenge for managers by saying something off the cuff that gets interpreted in some different ways. So most executive communications are so handled and so screened. I've worked with senior executives who are very compelling, but when they speak, they've been so scripted that they basically look like automatons, soulless automatons, and it's because of that scripting process. So to be fair, we need a lot more informal, but we also need the ability to edit out the times they say stuff they shouldn't say. And that's really the secret sauce, my friend. They go live, they talk, they've got their talking points, and then somebody very cheaply, it's not very expensive, goes through and edits like other podcasters do when they lose it, and they edit it out so they don't lose their audience. It's the exact same thing. It's just most people in internal communications haven't worked outside. And most executives and most leadership teams and most legal offices are really freaked out at the thought the executive may get recorded saying things.
We're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Episode number 2, we're going to go ahead and jump back in a week from today. Probably a little bit more structure here, but
I hope not, but keep going.
You hope not. So the recap here is you got to learn to talk to the different generations like they want to be talked to. If you're a leader, you can be doing a lot more probably to talk to your employees right where they're at, maybe with your cell phone between meetings. And the third thing is, if you have like a rock in your stomach right now, you probably need to fire somebody within the next 48 hours. Or how long ever it takes you to get it worked out with HR.
Talk to HR, fill your paperwork out, and then deal with the rock in your stomach. But yes, I agree in principle with what Seth is saying.
And if you're doing our reverse fantasy draft of your 10 worst employees, for goodness sakes, do mind the whiteboard that it gets fully erased and doesn't have the outline left.